Welcome back to my channel, Feldenkrais Now. So we're going to do a lesson today and we're going to work on the hip joints. And I want to just remind you that the hip joints are behind you. They are located about 10 to 12 centimeters above your sit bones. And they're in a kind of a diagonal. You can't touch them. And this is one of the reasons it's hard to feel where they are. And a lot of people think they're in the front because that is where we fold our leg, right? We fold and bend our leg. So people think that their hip joint is here. It's behind, and that is where the head of the femur, of the thigh bone, connects with the hip. So it is behind you. Today we want to work on the hip joints. We want to see if we can help soften them. And of course, I want to remind you that the movement of the pelvis translates also into movements of the rib cage and the legs. We will see how it is connected. I hope you will feel it more than you will see it. So please come to lie on the floor, on a mat that you're comfortable on. Not too soft and not too hard. So take a moment to lie down, to feel how your body is on the mat today. What is grabbing your attention? Unfortunately, when something is painful, that's usually what grabs our attention first, and then it becomes very difficult to notice other things. So if there is something that feels painful right now, think about directing your breath to that area. I know it sounds a little bit bizarre, but it's worth trying, giving it a try. So you just breathe in, and you think that you're directing some of the oxygen into that area, whichever area hurts, if there is such an area. And if there's no such area that hurts right now, that's great. Then just you can kind of direct your oxygen into the lower abdomen. This also has a very calming effect. So just breathe 2-3 times into your lower abdomen. Obviously, you're breathing elsewhere too. Your lungs are under your rib cage, higher up. So obviously that is what is expanding. And we think about also expanding our lower abdomen. And see if you can release a little bit the muscles in your face. And if you can feel the weight of your body on the floor. And what feels lying on the floor well and heavy? What feels heavy right now? Is it the back of your head? Is it your shoulder girdle? Your shoulder blades? Or is it your pelvis or your legs? And now please pay attention to your feet. And without looking at this stage, take a moment to see if you can sense that one of your feet seems to be a little bit more open to the outside. It's a little bit more on the side. One of your feet. Notice which one. And when this becomes clear, you can lift your head for a second and just take a look and notice whether what you felt is also objectively correct. Sometimes it isn't, and that's also okay. So that foot, which is a little bit more open to the side, it could be that on that leg, your hip joint is a little bit more relaxed. So let's start with that foot. The foot that is more open to the outside. Let's start with that leg and just roll that leg right and left, very easily, as much as you can do easily. Right and left. Just your leg is straight and you roll it right and left. Very simple. And then you stop that and you do the other leg, the one that felt a little bit less open to the side. See how this is different? If you can sense the difference, sometimes we can't. And that's okay, it might not even be relevant for us right now. Okay. And so now we go back to the leg, which we started with, the one that is a bit more open, and we start doing the following. You bend your knee to the side, and you pull your heel towards your sit bone, and then you stand that foot. So I'm starting with my right foot, but of course if you're doing it with your left, then you do it with your left, whichever felt more open. Then you let your knee drop again to the side, and then you're sliding the outside edge of your foot downward, and your leg. And now that you've understood the movement, I'd like you to take your awareness and your attention to your pelvis. As you're lying with your legs long, your pelvis is in a neutral space. And think of your pelvis, you may think of your pelvis as a bowl. And you may want to touch for a moment those bones that are sticking out on the sides, right and left side of your pelvis. They're called iliac crest. Put your hands on them and feel them. They stick out. All right. And if you keep your fingertips there and you continue making the movement with the same leg, you will feel that your pelvis starts to tilt. And that tilt requires a lot of movement in your lower back and some movement in your abdomen. So see if you can think about your lower back being relaxed and loose, and your abdomen being relaxed and loose, to facilitate the movement of the pelvis and of the leg. It's a lot of things to think about. Okay, give it a rest. And notice what you feel in that leg that you worked with. Does it feel a bit more open? Does the knee feel a little bit more, maybe a tiny bit folded, a tiny bit bent? That could be a very nice feeling, because that's what you've been doing. So maybe there's like a residue in your leg right now. And you can again lift your head and look at your feet and notice, wow, in my case, the leg I've been working on, my right leg, the foot is even more outward. It's lying a little bit more to the side, and that might mean, hopefully, that my right hip joint is kind of loosened a little bit. So let's look at the other foot. Okay, so let's do the same thing with the other leg. So I'm bending my knee to the side, and I'm pulling my heel, I want to say my left heel, but my heel, whichever heel you're using, towards the sit bone, and then I stand my leg on the floor. When I stand my foot on the floor. When I stand my foot on the floor, again my pelvis is in a neutral position. I let my knee fall outward, and by sliding the outer edge of my foot on the floor, I straighten my leg. And I'm going to do that, let's do that 4 more times. And try to keep your jaw loose as you're doing this. Try to notice that your breathing is still flowing. And then bring your attention to your pelvis, how it's tilting. It's tilting to the side. And that means that something is happening in the lower back and something is happening in your abdomen. And notice where your head goes and where your eyes want to go. One more time. Let's do it one more time. If your head wants to move, let it. Why not? Maybe that makes the movement a lot more holistic. You may want to lift your head again, look at your foot, see if that foot also came out a little bit more, came to the side, is a little bit tilted outwards more than before. That would be nice. And now let's do it once to the right, once to the left. And I'm going to kind of accelerate the movement a little bit here. So I'm really going to I'm going to let my head go freely. Probably your head wants to tilt to the side of the knee that you're bending. So let that happen. Do it a little bit faster, a little bit easier. Make it so it's a pleasurable movement. Let your pelvis be as free as possible. One more time on each side. And then bring it to a rest. And if you think about the way your body is lying on the floor, the area that lies on the floor better now might not be the one that you expect. So I'll share with you that I was convinced that my pelvis would be kind of heavier on the floor, but what I'm really feeling right now is my shoulder blades, my shoulder girdle, and the vertebrae between my shoulder blades. So of course, as we're moving our pelvis, our rib cage is also moving. In a moment, we'll see that very clearly. Let's just roll our legs, the legs that we started with, the leg that was more open to begin with. Let's roll it a little right and left, maybe a bit quicker. Kind of what children do when they're bored. See how that goes. Do the other leg. So most of the movement here is, of course, in the hip joints. All right. Bring both your feet to standing on the floor. And now let's do, if you know Feldenkrais at all, you will know this movement very well. It's called the 3 and the 9, you know, based on the lesson of the clock. But if you don't know, that's just fine. So just lift the left side of your hip, lift it a little bit off the floor so that the right side of your hip presses into the floor, and then you release, and you do it on the other side. So if you think again of your pelvis as a bowl, imagine you have water in the bowl, and if you lift one side of the pelvis, water is running down the other side. As I lift the left side of my pelvis, on the right side the water is running down above my iliac crest to the floor, and I release it, and I do it on the other side. And do it very gently. Don't let your knees fall to the side. I see this a lot. People like to let their knees fall to the side. That is not what should happen. What you do feel is that as, let's say, you lift the right side of your pelvis, the right knee comes a little bit away from you, and also on the left. You may keep your fingertips on those bones that protrude, the iliac crests, and just feel, make it very gentle. Just lift one side of your hip, the edge, the corner, the other corner, that corner, this corner. Let your head roll with your hip, with your pelvis, and see how your knees are moving away. They're not falling. I'm not taking my knees in and out, but they're moving a little bit away from my chest. Keep doing this very gently, very lightly, and then if you want, bring your attention to your rib cage, to your lower rib cage. Put your arms on the floor, and notice how there's movement in the rib cage. And if you want to, you can make that movement a little bit bigger. You can exaggerate it a little bit. Something very gentle, free, pleasant. Of course, your vertebrae are moving as well. And bring that to an end, and if you're comfortable with it, stretch out your legs and see. Now I expect you feel that your pelvis is lying on the floor differently. Perhaps you feel more length in your abdomen. That means that your pelvis is a little bit more tilted, that you have a little bit more of a curvature in your lower spine. That is a good thing. And see, perhaps you feel how this part of your lower abdomen is a little bit longer. That means it's not contracted, it is open. So if you think again about those bones that are sticking out in your pelvis, the iliac crest and your lower ribs, you can feel maybe a little bit of an opening between those 2 points. All right, this can be the first part of the lesson for you. If all you wanted is to kind of soften a little bit your hip joints and you don't have much time, you can stop here, you know, slowly lie on the side and then get up and walk around and feel. It's very important to walk around and feel afterwards if there's any change. And if you want to continue, so this would be the second part of the lesson. You stand both your feet on the floor, and now you really space out your feet about to the width of the mat. If you have a yoga mat, so I'm at least shoulder width apart and even a little bit more. And now I let my right knee drop downward to the left as if I wanted to take it to the floor. And back to the center. So now we have an interesting rotation I pointed in the wrong place, in your hip joint. We'll start with the right leg. And don't go, please, to a place of discomfort. and breathe. And see what happens when you let your right knee drop downward, inward. Where do you feel more pressure in your back? This affects also your back. Notice. Is there an area on the left side of your rib cage that kind of pushes into the floor as you do this? Okay, next time we're going to stay halfway down with our knee. So we're going to take the right knee about halfway down. We're going to move the right foot a little bit away from the pelvis, and then we're going to just gently press with the inner edge of the right foot into the floor and release that. If that hurts, don't do it. Stand your knee back to the center and just press your foot like that into the floor. This, you only do this obviously if there's no pain. So you have your right knee is bent inward about halfway, maybe a little bit less even. And I'm just pressing the inner edge of my right foot a little bit into the floor. You feel that something interesting is happening with your hip joint. It's opening. The right side of your pelvis is coming a little bit away from the floor. And you may feel that your left shoulder blade is pushing into the floor. Now do this gently, freely a few times, maybe a little bit faster. Notice your breath is free, your jaw is not clenched. And bring your right knee back to the center. Bring your right foot back next to your left foot at the same height, I would say. And now again, spread out your feet about the width of the mat. If you have a yoga mat, that's a good reference. And slowly let your left knee come inward and notice, where is your attention going? The place where your attention goes is maybe where your attention is needed. But just notice. Do you feel, is it different? So let's do this. Take the right knee inward again, once, and then the left knee inward. And again the right knee. And the left knee. Then if you want, take a look. Look, put a hand under your head, lift your head and take a look. It will change the movement a little bit, unfortunately, but still. Okay, I can't see a difference, but I can definitely feel a difference. Stay with your left knee halfway inward, downward, and walk with your foot, with your left foot a little bit away from your pelvis. So now your left foot is a little bit further towards the end of the mat than the right foot. And press a little bit into the inner edge of your left foot. And see where that goes. And again. And see what happens to your left hip joint. It's a funny little movement. The left side of the pelvis lifts a bit away. You can feel something happening inside your left hip joint. Try to sense it. It's quite a clear thing. It's hard to sense our hip joints, but here we can. And see where that movement goes. Where does that movement, how does that translate in your skeleton? And stand your foot, bring it back. Take a little rest like this with your feet standing in a comfortable place. Let's do one more thing. Let's take both our feet a little bit away from our pelvis. So I'm walking a little bit away from my pelvis. I spread my feet to the edge of the mat, each one. And then I let my right leg come a little bit downward and I press into the foot, the right edge of the foot, and I release. And now I do that with my left. So we're just going to play with it a little bit. So it's not important how big the movement is, how good the movement is, but I would think that it's important to see on which side is the movement clearer. How does your skeleton translate the movement? Where do you feel? Oh, that's clear. And on that side, maybe it's not so clear. And then release everything down and rest. You may want to lift your head again and take a look at your feet and see where your toes are pointing at, what your toes are pointing at, what direction you're at. See if you can leave your knees unlocked. Okay, let's do one more variation with our hip joints. Bring your feet to standing again on the mat. And you want to walk with your feet a little bit downward. So I'm just kind of walking my toes a little bit away from my pelvis. Now I want you to flex both your feet. So you're actually kind of bringing your toes towards your shins. You stay like that. Maybe even take your heels a little bit away from your pelvis. So now you're pressing onto, and now you start, your heels are on the floor and you press a little bit into your heels and release. Again, press and release. It's an interesting little movement. Usually we do this with our feet into the floor, not with our heels, but the effect on the pelvis is a little bit different when we use our heels. And see how the pelvis is tilting a little bit, and also how the lower edge of your pelvis is coming away from the floor, and how you can feel this movement in your hip joints. So just press and release. Press, make it a little faster. So you have a little bit of a tension in your feet, that's correct. And release your feet down. Take your feet back towards your pelvis. So now your knees are more or less on top of your ankles, right? So that is a very neutral position. And again, let's do the movement we did a while ago, which is just lifting up the left corner of your pelvis, and then the right side of your pelvis presses into the floor. And lift the right side of your pelvis, and the left and the right, and see what your head is doing. Let your head be free. And just lift and lower, lift and lower. And see again, as you lift, okay, so let's do this. Lift the left side of your pelvis and see how the right side of the back of the pelvis touches the floor. And release the left side of your pelvis. Lift the right side of your pelvis and see how the left side of the back of the pelvis presses into the floor. And now keep doing this. And notice if one side comes down clearer onto the floor. I'm asking something quite subtle. You may not feel this, but you may. All right. Release that for a moment. Rest with your legs standing. And now, just to end the lesson, a little bit of a spine twist, something very gentle. You can do this anytime, even just on its own. It's a great movement. So just take your arms to the ceiling. Make sure there is no tension in your hands. I see a lot of students, they like clench their fists. So it's not necessary. Okay, so just have your hands kind of be free. Try not to overstretch your arms towards the ceiling. They're just standing vertically. And now take your legs, your knees as they are, hip width apart, a little bit to the left, and your arms and your face a little bit to the right. And come back to the center with your arms and your knees. And let's do it a few times on the same side. So you want to have your face and your gaze and your nose in between your two hands and bring it back. And don't do more than is comfortable. Think of your vertebrae. One more time on this side. Come back to the center, take a breather. Let's do it to the other side. So I'm taking my arms to the left and my knees kind of go a little bit to the right and back. Let's do that 3-4 more times onto that side. And really feel the rotation between your vertebrae. Where do you feel it? And don't go too far with your knees. You are the one who's controlling the movement. If it feels too much, don't let your knees come down so much. Again, last time on the left. Come back to the center, lower your arms for a second, take a breather. Take your arms back, please, toward the ceiling. Your hands are relaxed. My arms are not overly stretched. Also, make sure that your arms are vertical. Many times I see people with their arms a little bit, you know, their hands are in front of their nose. Make sure that your hands are really above your chest. And now let's do it, you know, once to the right, once to the left, once to the right. And again, think of your vertebrae and don't do too much. The vertebrae relax when they don't feel threatened. And then if you want, you can bring your arms and make half a circle above your head. And then bring it to the center. Take your arms to the right and knees to the left. Rotate your arms above your head. And then come to a diagonal. And again. You don't have to do this, depends on the freedom you have in your arms, in your shoulders. Gives you a nice stretch in the chest. So I'm going from a diagonal above my head to a diagonal. One more time. Only do this if it feels good, otherwise just stay with what we did before. Bring everything back to the center. Release your arms down to your side. Stretch out your legs. Breathe into your lower abdomen. We want to keep that front line of the body long, so that the lordosis we have in our lower back can be there. The curve, the inward curve over the lower back can be a little bit more accentuated, maybe a bit freer. We don't want to do it with pressure, but we can maybe feel our abdomen now a little bit longer and wider and looser. And slowly, slowly through the side, come to a sitting position. Maybe you want to keep your nose close to the floor. And then just lift your head at the end. Come to a sitting position. Doesn't matter how you sit, whatever feels good. And just feel how the weight of your upper body is resting on your pelvis. And then slowly come to standing. And it's very important to take a moment to feel yourself in standing. The first few seconds are pretty essential. So just really give yourself a moment to stand, to feel how your weight is distributed on your feet right now. If you can, again, even in standing, release your abdomen so that perhaps you feel a bit of a curve in your back. We all tend to contract our abdomen a lot. In the Western Hemisphere, this is very common. So perhaps try to see if you can stand and let your belly kind of be free and loose. It's the way small children stand. And see how that feels and how maybe that will shift your shoulders a little bit back, and then you have more freedom in your arms. Something to think about. So thank you for joining me today. I hope you will feel now that if you can walk a little bit, if you can feel what it does to your walking to have done this lesson for your hip joints. Have a nice day.